Hello and welcome. Today, we delve into one of the most enduring stories ever told. A story that has echoed for over 3,000 years, from the chants of blind poets to the silver screens of Hollywood. It is a tale of a face that launched 1,000 ships, a war that shattered a mighty kingdom, and a love or a theft that became the stuff of legend. Her name is Helen. Helen of Sparta. Helen of Troy. But who was she, beneath the weight of all those epithets? Was she a seductive queen who abandoned her throne for a passionate lover? A pawn in a divine game played with human lives, or perhaps something else entirely? A woman whose story was never truly her own. This is not the grand epic of Achilles' rage or Hector's heroism. This is the quiet tale of Helen of Troy. Let us step away from the roaring battles and the clashing armies, and listen instead for the whisper of silk in a sun-drenched palace. The quiet sigh of a woman who became a symbol, and the heartbreaking reality of being the most beautiful woman in the world. Part 1. The daughter of the swan. Our story begins not with a birth, but with a transgression. The king of the gods, Zeus, in one of his many earthly infatuations, took the form of a magnificent swan to seduce Leda, the queen of Sparta. From this union, so the myth tells us, 2 eggs were born. From one emerged Clytemnestra and Castor, from the other, Helen and Polydeuces. From her very inception, Helen was marked as something other, something divine and untouchable. Her beauty was not merely human, it was a celestial force. As a child, she grew up in the Spartan court, and even then, her radiance was a disturbance. It is said that when she was just a girl, the legendary Athenian hero Theseus, already an old man, abducted her. He was bewitched. He wanted to possess this living marvel, this daughter of a god. Her brothers, the Dioscuri, had to storm Athens to bring her home. This was the first ship launched for Helen, a prelude to the great armada to come. But such beauty is a dangerous inheritance. It attracts not only heroes, but trouble. Soon, suitors from every corner of Greece began to gather in Sparta, each a prince, each a warrior, each desperate to win the ultimate prize. Helen, her stepfather, King Tyndarus, looked upon this gathering of arrogant, competitive young men with dread. To choose, one was to insult all the others, potentially plunging Greece into a civil war before Helen had even left his halls. It was the cunning Odysseus, Prince of Ithaca, who provided the solution. He proposed that every suitor swear a binding oath to uphold the chosen husband's rights and to defend his honor should anyone attempt to steal Helen away. They would all be bound by the most sacred vows to protect a marriage that most of them would lose. The suitors, desperate, agreed. They swore the oath on the parts of a sacrificed horse, a grim and powerful ritual. The choice fell upon Menelaus, brother of Agamemnon, the powerful king of Mycenae. He was a solid, unremarkable man, a competent warrior, and a reliable politician. He was not chosen for passion, but for stability. He would be a safe harbor. And with this marriage, Menelaus eventually became the king of Sparta. For a time, life was peaceful. Helen was queen. She bore Menelaus a daughter, Hermione. She performed her royal duties, but one must wonder, what was it like to be Helen in those years? To be married to a man who saw you as the crown jewel of his treasury. To know that every glance from a visiting lord was not for you, but for the legend of your beauty. To live a life where your primary function is to be beheld. She was the perfect queen in a gilded cage, her every move dictated by the fact that she was, first and foremost, an object of supreme value. Part 2. The Prince and the Goddess. Meanwhile, in the lofty, windswept city of Troy, across the wine-dark sea, a crisis was brewing in the royal family. Queen Hecuba had a dreadful dream, foretelling that her unborn son, Paris, would be the firebrand that destroyed Troy. The infant was exposed on Mount Ida to die, but he was saved and raised by shepherds. He grew into a handsome, strong young man, unaware of his royal blood, content with a simple life. It was during this pastoral existence that the gods decided to play their game. At the wedding of Peleus and Thetis, the goddess Eris, strife personified, tossed a golden apple into the festivities, inscribed with the words, "To the fairest." 3 powerful goddesses immediately laid claim. Hera, the queen of the gods, Athena, the goddess of wisdom and war, and Aphrodite, the goddess of love and beauty. They turned to Zeus to judge. But he, wisely wanting no part of this, declared that the only mortal fit to judge such a contest was Paris, the Trojan shepherd prince, renowned for his honest heart. The 3 goddesses appeared before him on Mount Ida. It was not a simple beauty contest. It was a bribery auction. Hera offered him imperial power, dominion over all of Asia, and boundless wealth. Athena offered him wisdom and glory in battle, to be the greatest warrior and strategist of his age. Aphrodite, however, simply stepped forward and whispered one thing: the love of the most beautiful woman in the world, Helen of Sparta. What choice did a simple shepherd, a young man filled with passion and longing, truly have? Power and wisdom are abstract, the desires of older, more calculating men. But the love of a living, breathing woman, a woman whose fame was already a legend. For Paris, there was no contest. He awarded the apple to Aphrodite. With that single decision, he sealed his fate, Helen's fate, and the fate of his entire city. Aphrodite, now indebted to him, promised to make it so. Part 3. The abduction or the elopement. Soon after, Paris, now revealed as a prince of Troy, was sent on a diplomatic mission to Sparta. He arrived at the court of Menelaus, a guest under the sacred laws of hospitality, laws protected by Zeus himself. Imagine the scene in the Spartan palace. Menelaus, the solid, perhaps dull, king, and Helen, the queen, a woman who had lived for years as a statue on a pedestal, revered but never truly seen. And then enters Paris. He is not a Greek warrior. He is an Eastern prince. He is young, beautiful, exotic. He wears fine, colorful linens. His hair is perfumed. He plays the lyre and speaks of the vast, cosmopolitan city of Troy, a world away from the martial austerity of Sparta. He did not look at Helen as a prize. He looked at her as a man looks at a woman. And in his eyes, she saw not a legend, but a person. The ancient poets are divided on what happened next. The epic cycle, championed by Homer, often paints a picture of a willing Helen, seduced by Paris and Aphrodite's magic, who willingly abandons her husband and child for a life of passion. But let us pause and consider another version, a quieter, more tragic one. What if Helen was not a wanton queen, but a trapped one? What if Paris, armed with the irresistible favor of Aphrodite, offered her not just passion, but an escape from a life of being Menelaus's trophy, from the cage of her own beauty, from the stifling role of a Spartan queen? When Menelaus was called away to Crete for a funeral, the stage was set. Did Paris steal her, snatching the prized possession of his host? Or did Helen, in a moment of desperate, terrifying agency, choose to go with him? Did she pack her own things? Did she look back at the palace, at her sleeping daughter, with a heart tearing in two? They sailed away under the cover of night. Some versions say she was weeping. Others say she was laughing in the arms of her lover. The truth is likely a tangled knot of both. She was both an active participant in her own story and a puppet of the gods. She was both an adulteress and a refugee, and as their ship disappeared over the horizon, it left in its wake a silence more deafening than any thunder. Menelaus returned to an empty palace, his greatest treasure stolen, the oath of the suitors, that clever device of Odysseus, now ignited. The kings of Greece were bound by sacred vow. They had to sail for Troy. They had to bring Helen back. 1,000 ships were launched, not for a woman, the cynics say, but for pride, for honor, for plunder. And that is true. But the symbol, the catalyst, the face on the proverbial bow that guided every one of those ships was hers. Part 4. The shadow in Troy. Helen's arrival in Troy was not the triumphant homecoming she or Paris might have imagined. She was not welcomed as a new princess. She was viewed with suspicion, fear, and resentment. The old King Priam, perhaps seeing the tragedy to come, was nevertheless kind to her. But his wife, Hecuba, and many of his children, especially the prophetess Cassandra, who was cursed never to be believed, saw Helen for what she was, the harbinger of ruin. Hector, the noble crown prince, tolerated her for his brother's sake, but he could not hide his disdain for the war she had provoked. For 10 long years, the Achaean army laid siege to Troy, and for 10 long years, Helen lived as a ghost in the Golden City. She was a queen without a country, a wife without a true home. She walked the battlements of Troy, and from those high walls, she would look down upon the plain where thousands of men fought and died, their blood soaking the soil, all in her name. The Iliad gives us glimpses of this haunted woman. In a poignant scene, she speaks with Hector, the only Trojan who shows her a measure of kindness. She curses herself, calling herself a shameless whore, and wishes she had died before causing such grief. This is not the language of a happy, passionate lover. This is the voice of a woman consumed by guilt and self-loathing, trapped in a gilded cage far more terrible than the one in Sparta. Her relationship with Paris soured, the handsome prince who promised her passion and freedom was revealed to be a vain and mediocre warrior. He would strut in his fine armor, but on the battlefield, he was consistently bested. He preferred the comforts of the bedroom to the horrors of the field. Helen must have seen the comparison between him and the mighty Menelaus, a competent and respected fighter, however dull he may have been. She became a spectacle within the walls. The old men of Troy, when they saw her, would whisper, "Can we really blame the Trojans and the well-grieved Achaeans for suffering so long for such a woman? Terribly is she like the immortal goddesses to look upon." Even in their admiration, they objectified her. She was a wonder, a marvel, a cause, but never a person. She tried to weave the story of the war into a tapestry, a silent, desperate attempt to make sense of the chaos she had authored, but she was merely a thread in a larger pattern, woven by the fates and the cruel whims of the gods. Part 5. The Fall and the Echo. After a decade of stalemate, the war ended with the ruse of the Trojan horse. The city fell in a single night of horrific slaughter and fire. Menelaus, his rage burning as hot as the flames consuming Troy, fought his way through the chaos to the palace, intent on killing the wife who had betrayed him. He found her. The legends say she was in her chambers, or perhaps seeking refuge at an altar. When Menelaus burst in, sword in hand, ready to strike her down, she did something simple and profound. She let her robe fall from her shoulders. It was not an act of seduction, but of vulnerability. She stood before him, not as the legendary Helen, but as the woman he had married, the mother of his child, stripped of all defenses. And Menelaus, looking upon her, found his rage melting away. The spell of her beauty, or perhaps the memory of the woman he once knew, was too strong. His sword clattered to the floor. He forgave her. The Homeric epic, the Odyssey, shows us their return. After years of wandering, they are reconciled, back in Sparta, living once more as king and queen. Telemachus, the son of Odysseus, visits them and finds a picture of domestic peace. Helen moves through the halls, a gracious hostess, even casually drugging the wine to make the guests forget their sorrows. She speaks of her time in Troy with a detached, almost nostalgic air, as if it were a story about someone else. It is a strange, almost unsettling ending. How could they simply go back? How could the 1,000 ships, the 10 years of war, the ashes of Troy, simply be forgotten? Perhaps it is because Helen, the woman, was always separate from Helen, the symbol. The symbol launched the ships. The woman had to live with the aftermath. The symbol caused the war. The woman had to bear the guilt. When the war was over, the symbol was no longer needed. The kings got their honor and their plunder. The poets got their epic. And Helen was left, a quiet, enigmatic woman growing old in a Spartan palace, forever haunted by the ghost of the girl she once was, the girl whose beauty reshaped the world. Conclusion: the face in the water. So, who was Helen of Troy? She was a daughter, a wife, a mother, a queen, a lover, and a prisoner. She was a victim of divine manipulation and a perpetrator of mortal betrayal. She was the ultimate object of desire. Yet she may have never truly been desired for herself, only for the idea of her. Her story is the story of beauty as a weapon, a curse, and a commodity. It is a warning about the destructive power of passion and the heavy cost of pride. But most of all, it is a human story. If we listen quietly, past the clash of swords and the boasts of heroes, we can hear her, a woman trying to find her own voice in a world that only wanted to sing about her face. The 1,000 ships have long since turned to dust at the bottom of the Aegean Sea. The walls of Troy are but a whisper in the wind-swept earth of Hisarlik. But Helen remains, not as a historical figure we can pin down, but as an eternal question. She is the face we see reflected in the water, beautiful, tragic, and forever out of reach, reminding us that the greatest stories are not about gods and monsters, but about the quiet, complicated hearts of men and women, caught in the tides of a world too large for them to control. Thank you for listening.